Good morning. My name's Dr. Mark Smith, and I'm here today to speak on the topic of hyper-certification. How much is too much? Basically, I'm presenting on behalf of NATRU ASIBL, which is the International Natural and Organic Cosmetic Association. And I'd just like to go over today a couple of areas, basically to give you an introduction to who we are as NATRU, to speak a little bit about the regulatory framework when it comes to natural and organic cosmetics, some of the market information drivers, basically expectations from consumers, and also some information about a recent survey we've done of consumer expectations and perceptions of natural and organic cosmetics, as well as cover just a little bit about standards, seals, certifications, and summarise with the general learning and perspectives about the market. So first of all, about NATRU. NATRU, full title is the International Natural and Organic Cosmetic Association, is an international non-for-profit association based here in Brussels, where I'm presenting now. We were founded in 2007. The label, which is present on PAC, which basically prescribes criteria to our voluntary private standard for natural and organic cosmetics products and raw materials, was established in 2008. We have 78 members currently worldwide as of our last membership assembly in 2020. And basically, we were established by the pioneers and global market leaders of the certified natural and organic cosmetic sector, who you can see below. We have 4 general commitments, which the association is working on. There's the ongoing development of a high quality international applicable standard, promotion of the label, which is essentially a representation of the criteria within that standard. As an advocacy organisation, that's initially how we were set up. We also participate and contribute to EU regulatory decision making, principally being, for example, part of the European Commission's working group on cosmetic products. And also we provide, through our various working groups internally and through the association, access for consumers to high quality information about natural and organic cosmetics. So we're really in the area of, let's say, misleading claims or potential for misleading claims. And often the word greenwashing is flagged when you come to talk about natural and organic cosmetics. So just as a point of reference, and I invite you to have a look at this document from the UN, although it's ostensibly focused on food products, there's still obviously some transposable elements here, where, for example, greenwashing here is defined as an attempt to mislead consumers and to market products more environmentally friendly than they are, a misrepresentation, a claim that can't be verified, etc., etc. So this is quite a good basis for essentially what we're talking about with natural and organic cosmetics. Just as an aside, it's also important, I think, to focus when we talk about natural products on the importance of sustainability. And again, if you've not read it, I invite you to have a look at the Brundtland report from 1987, which essentially leads the path towards the UN 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals that we currently have. And when we're talking about bio-based products, again, another area of reference that may be interesting for you is this report which came out from the Joint Research Centre, or the JRC, as part of the European Commission on the impact of bio-based products and how this could contribute to, for example, lowering greenhouse emissions across Europe. And if you want to look at the SDGs, NATRU has also incorporated some of the applications of 6 of the 17 SDGs within our most recent standard, as you can see on the slide. So without further ado, we'll just dive into the area of the EU framework for natural and organic cosmetics. So to begin with, we have essentially 3 tiers, let's say, of legislation. The first one is the binding legislation, of course, applicable to all products on the market, all cosmetic products. And this basically encompasses the European Cosmetics Regulation and the common criteria for claims. So this is regulations 1223/2009 and 655/2013, respectively. And these basically define, for example, product claims. It also has areas, obviously, for safety of products and animal testing. Well, no animal testing requirements as well. Then you have above that, you have basically, let's say, national legislation, which covers, for example, B2C or B2B practices when it comes to claims. These do include some environmental components. So, for example, there's the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive and the Misleading and Comparative Advertising Directive. And then as a third tier on this, which kind of slot into the area of the binding legislation, let's say, because there is no official regulatory definition for natural and organic cosmetics, or rather how those terms are applied to finished cosmetic products, as we'll see on the next slide. There are non-binding private voluntary standards that basically prescribe criteria either for self-declaration or for certification of finished products. As well as there are supporting documents for legislation like the technical document on claims, which covers, for example, how free from claims are applied to products. So at the EU level, what we have is we have harmonised legislation for cosmetic products. We have technical guidance for claims. We have these private voluntary standards. What we don't have is basically harmonised criteria across the union. So a single document which references, for example, what ingredients, how to define a natural and organic ingredient, how to basically prescribe how to calculate content. There's not a single harmonized piece of criteria. There are various voluntary standards. There's also no legal definition for what a natural and organic cosmetic product is. So, for example, how many natural or organic ingredients have to go into a product in order to substantiate that claim. There's also no indication or guidance, a bit like, for example, within an annex to the technical guidance for claims, on how the claims, natural and organic, are applied without being misleading to the consumer. And the result of this can mean that there can be intra-market differences across the EU, potentially with some member states applying their own guidance, as I've given an example here in France. And other member states, like, for example, Germany, who have a very mature market and a good understanding generally from consumers about what these products are. But overall, consumers are generally looking for greener products, but there's always the risk that they can be confused and misled by the type of claims that are presented. And we'll talk about this in a minute. In terms of the general market itself, we can say that there are, on the one hand, conventional cosmetics, which essentially are obviously made mostly up of petrochemical-based raw materials. But then we have an area which is, because there's no official definition, essentially a split between what we would call, let's say, a nature-inspired cosmetic and a natural cosmetic. What do I mean by these? Well, nature-inspired will basically contain an undefined mixture of both natural and synthetic substances, whereas a natural cosmetic will be more focused upon having wholly natural ingredients within the formulation. Of course, there are, within the realm of natural cosmetics, both certified and non-certified. Now, conscious consumerism is a growing area. We see this as a mega trend that's been established worldwide, and consumers are generally more interested in the area of natural products. It shows quite a high degree of growth, not specifically linked necessarily to European countries, but it can be much further abroad. And Natru has done recently a couple of studies, one which was actually you see on the left with exploring the territory of natural and organic cosmetics. This was done some time ago, but on the right we basically conducted a study recently to look at a number of areas to do with, for example, brand perception and consumer expectation, and we'll come to that in a minute. But what are the consumer expectations of natural and organic cosmetics? Well, I think we can start off by, for example, looking at sustainability, and we can say that there's, for example, the source of ingredients. It could be to do with, like, for example, the plastic use and whether the bottles themselves or whatever material is used in packaging is recyclable or refillable, and how easily that is done. It could be aspects of ethical and social engagement, for example, promoting fair trade ingredients or animal protection, vegan claims, for example. Environmental protection, of course, is on the rise, including protection of biodiversity. So this might be, for example, on the biodegradability of ingredients, whether the products contain no microplastics, whether they make claims like carbon neutral, et cetera, et cetera. At the core, of course, you have natural and organic ingredients, essentially where the extracts come from, whether you include animal-derived ingredients like honey or milk, etc. There's also the case that generally consumers who buy natural products or gravitate towards them are looking to avoid petrochemical-based ingredients. Now, this can be for a number of reasons. Maybe they just want a more authentic product. Maybe they're looking to avoid petrochemical ingredients because of perception of hazard avoidance. Of course, this is in terms of cosmetics. All cosmetics have to be safe by law, so this is purely a perception at that point. But then obviously there's an area that consumers expect to have innovative products that are, of course, both safe, functional and effective. Now, Natru did, as I briefly mentioned, a study recently carried out in January and February of this year, which you can also read about on our website or write to me afterwards if you'd like more information. But in essence, the first thing is that naturalness is a key decision maker when it comes to, obviously, natural products. In fact, it makes up something between a fifth and a quarter of the entire pie of decisions that you can see here, and it is the dominant decision maker. But when we focus on the two countries that we carried out this study in, which was Germany, represented by DE, and France by FR, as the largest markets, both for natural and organic cosmetics, but principally cosmetics as well, let's say, that we decided to basically divide naturalness into various areas. For example, 6 common factors. So, for example, this might be a case of natural and organic ingredients free from certain substances, things about the biodegradability or biodiversity, the fair trade element, the packaging and the packaging waste, and animal protection. And what we can see is areas like, for example, animal protection and natural cosmetics, natural ingredients rather, are dominant factors. But of course, there's generally a consistency across the board with all of these different elements. This is in our report. It may be a little bit small on the screen. I hope not. But if you need more information, I can, of course, come back to you. So what does this mean? In terms of naturalness, what we identified generally, let's say, as 5 key elements are principally the same between Germany and France, but with some differences. Obviously, there's the area of protection of animal welfare. In certain cases, there may be that there's more a focus on, for example, some environmental characteristics, and in some cases it's more to do with, like, for example, how the substance was sourced, whether it comes from organic agriculture, for instance. But there's, of course, always this focus on, as claimed, the 100% natural ingredients. What we looked at then was we looked at the area of brand association, and essentially we passed a number of brands, both nature-inspired brands and also natural cosmetics, including those which are certified to, for example, the Natru standard and other standards on the market. And we looked to see how these brands were associated with each of the elements of naturalness, these 6 elements, which you can see on the bottom of the screen. Now, generally, in terms in Germany, it seemed that there was a clear separation between what a natural cosmetic is, which is the line in green, and basically a conventional cosmetic product, which is let's say the pale blue line, and a nature-inspired product, which is the grey line. So consumers were able, the take home here is consumers were able to identify what a natural product was in that market, at least in correspondence to those figures. But in France, what happened is, except in the area of natural ingredients, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, what you see as you move into other factors, so for example, free from ingredients or fair trade ingredients or packaging or animal protection, there's a little bit more of a muddying of the waters, and consumers are less likely to be able to unambiguously, let's say, distinguish between a natural cosmetic with a nature-inspired cosmetic product, and that creates a problematic situation. Although I'd mentioned this case in Germany that consumers basically can appreciate the difference between a natural, nature-inspired and a conventional cosmetic product, the problem arises in the sense that there is still a risk of greenwashing. And here, brand X is basically a well-known brand on the German market, which is from a conventional company. It's not, in this case, a certified natural and organic cosmetic, but in terms of the perception by the consumer, this brand X, which is essentially a nature-inspired cosmetic, seems to overlap quite neatly with the area of it being perceived as a natural cosmetic. So there's still a risk of consumers being misled by, let's say, inventive marketing. And the same case is true in France, but even more amplified. So here you can see in some of the areas like fair trade or animal protection, the perception of basically the nature-inspired cosmetic product is in fact higher than a natural cosmetic product, which could include a certified natural cosmetic. So this adds another area of confusion in France. Now then, what we tried to look at as well was this area of labels. So just as a brief introduction to the labels, there are many, many labels on the market, at least I think 20 on the European market currently. Some of these you see in front of you aren't necessarily on the European market, of course, like USDA. But broadly, what I've just tried to do here for you is to say how we divide the labels into the type of criteria that they're looking at. So we can look at, for example, origin. So for example, are the ingredients animal tested? Are they compliant with vegan criteria? Are they halal? Are they non-GMO? We can look at multi-faceted, like multifactorial elements, where we look at both those origin of the ingredients, but also the manufacture of those ingredients. What type of processes do they use? Are they compliant or consistent with certain criteria? And basically, is there criteria to define what a finished product is? Now, for some of these standards, that last point exists, like, for example, Natru or Cosmos. For ISO 16128, it doesn't. This is the second part of that is really just to create a calculation scheme. Then we have these other areas to do with sustainability, which might be associated with the business. It might be associated with a certain raw material. And then there's this case of the environmental impact of the product and the raw materials as well, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. In terms of certification and the opportunity that certification provides, some of those seals will be self-declarations, some will be certification. But if we just focus on the self-declaration, despite an obvious increase in the efforts and costs by the party who wants to undertake this, at the end of the day, it gives the highest level of assurance to the consumer and the highest level of confidence. Of course, provided that the criteria is obviously like publicly available and also like the control bodies are independent themselves. All of this add extra qualities. So just taking a step back to the study that we were talking about, where I looked at we talk about the association of seals and certain characteristics. I've placed a couple of seals on here. So for example, you can see Natru in the red label. And what you can see is that labels which are multi-component, like Natru, which cover some elements to do with like ethical elements like animal testing, but also with sustainability sourcing and product criteria. These are winners, let's say, more when it comes to the natural and organic ingredients and the free-from aspect. But obviously, you could see that seals like, for example, cruelty-free or vegan are winners, let's say, when it comes to amplifying the specific product characteristic or element that their criteria is based upon. So in these cases, you can see, obviously, there's a clear differentiation. And that basically means it's much easier, obviously, to communicate a single characteristic than maybe something which is multifactorial. It's not to undermine something which is multifactorial, it's just to say it can be more complicated. Here we see in France a similar thing, but again, much more blurring between essentially all of these different labels, except for those which have very straightforward characteristics about the raw materials or the product that are looking to be communicated. So if I look to say then, like, about as a multifactorial label, what our standard provides, well, we do aim to develop the standard, of course, to reflect consumer expectations. We have criteria to basically look at brand commitment. So you have to have 3/4 of products in a range, for example, to be certified. So this means we can't pick and choose between products, because that could be another way that some brands could basically use misleading marketing about a couple of certified products and expand that and extrapolate that to the entire range when that might not be the case. So let's say in that case, we'd be focused on hero products, as I put here. We have third-party certification, again, to reassure the consumers, and we have elements of ingredients clarity for consumers. In other words, to look at what compliant substances you can have. We have animal welfare components to look at, like ensuring that no animal testing, obviously outside of Europe, takes place on finished products. That was essentially brought in for China. Of course, the rules have changed there. And then we have guarantees, for example, verifying the organic origin of substances, environmental protection components to do with, for example, no microplastics or palm oil criteria. And essentially, we have focus on, for example, not overinflating the product to respect claims and integrity. And I don't have the time today to go into all these criteria, but of course, I'm happy to take any questions where needed to. So there are a lot of labels on the market, but I think, like, the elements that I put here, let's say taking the Naturu label as an example of looking at what their commitment is, how their trust is reflected, whether their criteria is transparent, and how it's controlled, and the independence of those control are, let's say, 4 interesting elements to look at. So it's just in the last minute or two before I take questions, then there's a case to just look at what are the perspectives. Well, obviously, if we hark back to those 6 points we had at the beginning, we're looking essentially at the importance of cosmetics and their role that they can play essentially on environmental protection and biodiversity, how we can contribute also to the EU policy drive when it comes to green and digital agenda. But of course, this may be in other countries around the world. The Naturu label, to that extent, is an international. We need to look at the area of ethical and social engagement a little more. It needs to be obviously understood that being natural doesn't automatically mean that something is sustainable. There has to be work put in there. There obviously needs to take account of a social pillar because of the 3 pillars of sustainability with the economic, environmental and social. When it comes to sustainability, I'm sure we'll see a broadening of standards to incorporate elements like raw materials, packaging and sourcing. We ourselves are looking at that, have an internal working group on that. And there's also cooperation is key to basically finding new solutions. No one can do this alone. For natural and organic cosmetic ingredients, we'll probably see, like with all ingredients, consumers needing basically greater transparency and verifiable and traceable elements when it comes to the substances that are in these products. So we're basically working to support the supply chain through various systems we have for raw materials to basically ease the burden and avoid the double work, but ensure that consumers and finished product manufacturers can basically make products which meet these high expectations. At the end of the day, of course, consumers expect authenticity, but I think a key point that we shouldn't forget in all of this is the innovation element, looking at sustainable green chemistry driven alternatives to petrochemistry opens up many doors for chemists. I'm a chemist myself, so I think that that's an excellent and very interesting area to focus on. But there's also to look at accommodating new technologies, for example, like stem cell technologies, but without weakening the authenticity and transparency for consumers. So just as a final thought, there are a lot of obviously like labels and standards on the market. But if we focus on this area of natural cosmetics for a moment, there is a clear opportunity for the cosmetics industry to allow the market to grow. It needs to grow with trust. This is where some of the elements that I've talked about, like labels and seals, can come into account, but we have to be aware of some duplication and redundancy where there may be overlapping criteria between seals. So choice of seals is very important to reflect what you want and what you want your product to represent. There are regulatory gaps to fill. Naturally is looking at that area, and also this is a case to create more of a level playing field where we would hope that there's better guidance, particularly for consumers, when it comes to supporting green products and green claims. So as a final point, I'd just like to leave with you that the key challenge is to maintain and develop, not lose, consumer trust and confidence in natural and organic cosmetics, and remembering that always consumers have the right to know and the right to choose. So thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll be delighted to take them. And if you wish to contact us, please find our details on the screen.